Hello, friends. Chris McMillan here. I'm here with Cal Washington of InPower.com. Cal was recently a speaker at the Red Pill Expo in Hartford, Connecticut. Incredible topics. Cal has a lot of things to talk about. He has been through a lot of legal challenges, and through his challenges, he's discovered an incredible world that not many people are aware of, that know about. Cal, thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, no problem, Chris.
You mainly focus on the discoveries you've made through the being drugged through the system, focus around jurisdiction and the law, Canadian law, and you've discovered some incredible things. Now, your speech at Red Pill mainly focused on jurisdiction. And also, I was fascinated by your interview as well a few weeks ago with Richard Grove about your when you were in jail and you refused to sign anything. I thought that was incredible, and they never got anything from you as a result of that. I mean, I'm blown away at how many stories that you have to tell, and I'm not going to pretend to fully understand all of it, but today I'm particularly interested in the fact that Canada is actually a corporation. I was just wondering, could you tell us a bit more about that, how you came to discover it, and yeah, it's a fascinating story.
Well, we kind of knew that it was a corporation, mostly because it's on the U.S. SEC, and most countries are, and that's the proof. They're a corporation, and their job or their description is a foreign government. So it's a corporation that's acting as a foreign government. And Canada in particular, being one of the world leaders, quote unquote, is uniquely provable that it is a corporation, and it has been for hundreds of years. So if just by going back into history, you can see how it started as a corporation and then became a dominion for a few years and then went back to the corporation. So, and it was, there was an attempt to rectify it, but it failed. So we are still based on the documentation from the 1600s.
What about this was particularly interesting that I found. The 1982 Constitution actually never went through. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's because if you just read it's a short document. It's called the Queen's Proclamation from 1982 that was supposed to give it authority. She put a subject on it, and any contract that has a subject, the subject has to be removed before the contract or the edict becomes valid. So the subject has not been removed, up until yesterday. So I haven't seen a proclamation, because there has to be another proclamation. And so that is a sign that it's still waiting to be the subject to be removed, and therefore the act can become valid.
And does this has something to do with Section 59? Is that right? And it would ultimately depend on the people of Quebec?
Yeah, because if you just read Section 59, it's a little bit convoluted because it kind of sends you, off and then off to Section 24, I believe it is. And that is a language issue that it's a simple thing, but it's that parents can have their children taught in any language that they want. Either we have two official languages, so either French or English, and Quebec will never sign off on that. So that's why once that's satisfied and Quebec agrees to it, then Section 59 has to be removed from the Act, not just repealed, but actually removed and the Act renumbered. It's written right in there. And there has to be another proclamation either by the Queen or the Governor General.
And if that were to happen, what would that mean? That would mean there would be a constitution, and that would completely change the ball game. Am I right?
Well, it wouldn't change the ball game because they're acting as if it's valid anyway. Like they've just gone on and people believe that there's a constitution, and they even use it in court at, having so-called constitutional arguments and bring it before judges. But every time I saw a constitutional argument by somebody else, the judges were quite gleeful about it, because it gave them instant jurisdiction as soon as you mention that, because you've missed the mark, right? So that was sort of the body language that I saw. That there was never this dreaded constitutional argument. It was always oh good, I got a constitutional argument. It's very simple to proceed from here, right?
Is this something that all the judges would be aware of, or do you think there's a certain percentage of judges that are aware of this, or a lot of them genuinely don't understand this?
I think, there's no way for me to answer that. I don't know, because I don't know what judges know or don't know, but I saw knew. I would think that they would understand it.
So the 1982 Constitution, it was called something before that, and then they just renamed it. Is that right?
Well, they've been renaming it going back. If you start to go on the websites, they're starting to call the Constitution Act 1867. They're trying to backdate it.
Okay.
And I think over time, it's hard to tell what they're doing, but I think over time what they're hoping is that the BNA Act will just become non-existent, and that they're trying to backdate the current act to that time, because there's really no fix that I can see other than coming to the Canadian people and saying, hey, we have to actually form a constitution.
Do they teach, do you know offhand, do they teach in school that there's a constitution, or do they kind of very cleverly get around that by not directly saying it? I mean, I have no idea what is the general word out there, because from what I understand, they're trying that there's a general consensus that there is a constitution and it is in effect. This is very misleading. Is this intentional?
Well, it's definitely intentional, only because they don't. I think they don't know what to do. It's a huge problem, and Pierre Trudeau tried to fix it. I don't know. I don't know if he was being benevolent or not, but he did at least attempt to fix it. And he said we have a constitutional problem. That's how it was worded, but the problem was there was no constitution, and there was no country. So, because we were still operating under the Hudson Bay Charter, and as far as I can tell, that's the only thing that exists as far as European rule here. And so they tried to basically revive the BNA Act, but you couldn't revive it because it had been repealed by Queen Victoria. So they had to change the name, but kept the wording the same in order to try and revive it.
Yeah, I love it. I've got it here. It's a circus act. It really is. This is what is from your website. When Trudeau, he tried to revive the BNA Act, it had been repealed by Queen Victoria, and that made it impossible to revivify. There was no mechanism to restore the BNA Act, because the BNA Act created the Parliament, and the Parliament had been virtually dissolved, so they couldn't even pass an act to create themselves. I mean, yeah, it's incredible.
It was and still is a very huge problem. And even going to the Canadian people, the problem is that everybody will figure this out. And from 1893 up until the day they try and fix it, all the acts don't exist. Like, there's no authority for them. So that creates a huge problem for anybody that's been convicted of any kind of statute where there was no proper de jure authority to even pass the act and then try and enforce it on somebody, right? So it's a catch-22, and they're just trying to pretend it's not a problem and carry on, right? So
you go into court and you start spouting out things about the Constitution, and they know they've got you. what would be the ideal alternative? What could you do?
Well, from my perspective, I don't go into court as the moving party ever. But when I was dragged in there, then I would challenge the jurisdiction. That's the short, simplified answer to that. So I would challenge the jurisdiction based on show me where the BNA Act is in force, or show me where the Constitution Act is in force. And then, I put the proofs thereof. And if you can't do that within 30 days, then I'm not coming. And so that's sort of the tack that I used. And, of course, they arrested me anyway, but they still had this issue because I wouldn't back down, right? So, and I wouldn't sign anything, so they couldn't get what they needed to carry on their deeds, for lack of a better word. So that's how I did it, and now it's to the point where they just don't want to deal with me at all, right? So
did they literally drag you into court? Because if you go willingly, you're making a statement. Is that right? You're entering their contract. So in order to not be a part of that, they literally have to drag you to court. Is that what happened to you?
Yeah, and the Bible verse says when they drag you to court. There's a Bible verse, not when you walk in there, voluntarily. So even when they drag you, you still have to deal with all their tricks, answering to their name and agreeing to anything all the way along, because that's how they get jurisdiction, is by your agreement. So it's a contract.
Yes, it's fascinating. It really is. It's mind-blowing. I don't know how to, forgive my pronunciation. There was Iona Campagnola. Is that how I pronounce it?
Iona Campanolo.
Yes. 2000.
Okay, Campanolo, yeah.
She said something very clever that kind of released her liability, indicating that she knew all of this. Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, we were using the internet and just word searches. So we looked up all of the lieutenant governors where they used the word de facto, because we were, trying to prove that thing was de facto and not de jure. And we found that she had said certain words in a couple of speeches, and just by doing a word search on her website. And so then we read the speeches, and then there was more in there than just the word de facto. And she said that, like, her words were, "I, like Her Majesty, have no power." And then further down a couple of paragraphs, she said, "But as the CEO of the province, I have to sign all acts rendering them into law." And so I just took that as face value at the time. And my argument was, because you're dragging me in on a provincial act, this lady who has to sign the act says she has no power. Therefore, how are you enforcing something where she admits she has no power to do anything, right? So that the judge put his hands up and basically left the room. He didn't leave the room, but he didn't run out, but closed that, basically adjourned the case, stopped, and then I never saw him again. And we noticed that this was my cases were always on a Wednesday, and I think by Friday, Iona Campanola was no longer the lieutenant governor, and her website was shut down. They shut her website down that night. It was a Wednesday night. People have gone back in the Wayback Machine and noticed that it was shut down, but we didn't know that until we saw that she had been removed. Then we looked, and her website's down too, right? So, so those words, me speaking that in court, had an effect. They were caught, and but I didn't know the full story at the time. I didn't know that she wasn't even signing the acts. I thought she was, but they claimed in the same speech that she had no power. And so I'm going, well, where does her power come from? that was my point of view at the time. Later on, we found out she wasn't even signing the acts. Then her words took on different meaning, and so she was really disclosing that, because she would have known that she wasn't signing them. I mean, obviously, she would have to know that, and but she's saying I'm supposed to be signing them to render them into law. So her words took on different meaning.
So did anyone sign them? Who signs these?
When we started on the smart meter thing, there was in BC, there was an act called the Clean Energy Act. And so we wanted to go and see if it was given royal assent, which is what the lieutenant governor would do. And it turns out there's a clerk signing them, and he'd been signing them for 35 years or something. And, it was just like, this is how we do it. And we're going, well, that's not how it's supposed to be. There's only the lieutenant governor can give royal assent, because he or she is the representative of the Queen, right? But they weren't signing any of them. So that's why you can never get an act that's been given royal assent. Others pushed on this topic, and kept asking and going in there, and then they started saying that there was a nod, at a ceremony, and I was like, what do you mean a nod? So there was jokes going back and forth. Yeah, they're winking and nodding at each other, and everything's okay, right? And by that time, I wasn't interested in following it anymore. I just knew it was already, it was a big scam. So the reason why they're not signing them is because they're under the Hudson Bay Charter, and if you read that charter, they're allowed to make their own laws and enforce them. That's in there. But the laws cannot be repugnant to the common law. So the minute they try and pass an act that's repugnant to the common law, no royal is going to sign it. And people are thinking the Queen's signing all these things. She's not signing anything. And neither are her representatives. They're just passing it through, and we all agree to it, just thinking it's a law, but there's no proof thereof. And when you start saying this in court, the judges are kind of on the hook, because they're the front line of this, and that's what I experienced, was the judges weren't going to take the fall for all of that, right? So they started not coming in the room, and all kinds of behaviors. So you knew it was correct, and so it was just that type of thing, trial and error, and just kind of learning and blurting stuff out, and you start to come to the truthful conclusions.
So what about lieutenant governors since then? Is it the same story, or was she special because she, in her words, she, in no uncertain terms, admitted she knew what was going on and kind of released herself of that reliability? Has anyone confronted the current lieutenant governors about this information, or tried to interview them, or even Iona Campanola herself?
No, not that I know of. Like I said, I don't spend all my time trying to reprove something that's just, in my mind, very solid. I don't need any more information, so I'm not, I don't go after that type of thing. But like I said, there are people who are poking at it still, and but I don't know, what they've concluded. It's really hard to get to a lieutenant governor, like get them alone. And if you write to them, there's people who write on their behalf. So, and you just get go talk, go talk. What ends up happening is they say it's out of the scope of the lieutenant governor. This is the letter I get. I've had thousands, not thousands, but lots of them. And then the attorney general, the deputy attorney general, answers on their behalf.
Talking about the Hudson Bay Charter, so that's in effect but the Hudson Bay isn't all of Canada. Correct me if I'm wrong. So do the regulations that fall under the Hudson Bay Charter, does that affect the parts of Canada that are not part of the Hudson Bay area, that part of the original zone? And I believe it even originally covered parts of the Minnesota. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it went down into where the United States is now because the United States wasn't um, formed in the way that it is now. So it went, yeah, it was a very large area and it surrounded the Hudson Bay. So um, any rivers going in and out of the Hudson Bay were considered, like if you read the act, like they call them royal fish and royal sturgeons, and they basically made claim to everything, all the minerals, all the animals in and around that area, and gave it to his cousin, which was Prince Rupert, as a monopoly.
It's just incredible. Yeah, it's a little bit confusing, but I mean, the story, the timeline is, I mean, what clarified it for me was the 1982, the Constitution Act that was never passed um, because of the hang up with the Section 59. Um, does or is anyone still trying to push that through or even talking about it?
I don't think so. They tried twice, Meech Lake and Charlottetown, and it just failed. And you know, like if you know Quebecers, they're not gonna, they're never going to pass an act about the language. They're very, they're trying to keep their culture, and if anything, they're doing the opposite and making everybody do everything in French. So, you know, there's even a saying that the French police, right? So they go around, make sure signs are in French, and you know, it's they're moving in the opposite direction of having a bilingual area there. So
Very interesting. I would like to go visit there someday. I've only been up to Calgary in that area, and we drove across to Saskatoon. I know that's such a huge territory. Um, I Cal, I wanted to go back in time a little bit further to the law, merchant law. I remember in previous lectures you've talked about how when merchant law kind of came into place, it took over common law, and it was very discreet. Not many people realized how that happened, and everything actually, in fact, now works under merchant law. Um, how did that happen, and what time frame are we talking about?
it was the 1700s, and it was Lord Mansfield. Um, you can search on the internet. Some stuff has disappeared, of course, but and I wouldn't say that merchant law has overtaken the common law. It was more fused in, so I would call them equal. And in the Bills of Exchange Act in Canada, you know, they allude to that in the authority of the Bills of Exchange Act, saying that the common law and the law merchant are still the underlying law. As far as commerce goes. So that's more how I see it, is that they got the merchant law into the common law, and then they started closing down the pie powder courts and the staple courts.
And that's a big deception, isn't it? I mean, merchant law should not apply. Am I wrong, or is that?
Well, from my perspective, merchant law is actually very it's self-correcting. It's actually balanced only if you understand it. That's where the problem is. Like no merchant, because all the merchants agreed to this system. It was more like customs rather than laws. It evolved. It wasn't fixed. It kind of went with the times, and it was based on sort of fair, like equity law, basically. And so it was self-correcting. So it's not how people think it is. It's because you don't understand how it works. If you did, you could easily correct the oppression that's happening because of it.
Cal, at inpower.com, what are you guys working on? What is the main goal of the website? What do you do over there?
Well, we're we're offering 4 different contracts. We only have, some of them aren't quite done, but eventually we want to have 4 contracts that deal with some major issues on in the world using law merchant, so contract law and merchant law. And what, like I said, because merchant law is self-correcting, we can deal with a mano, and one of the main tenets of merchant law is that the truth prevails, and the truth is established by affidavit. So once you have an affidavit of truth that goes unrebutted, that becomes the truth for the matter, and then there's a very quick judgment.
So at the moment, you're working on cases to do with 5G, vaccines, and smart meters. Those are the 3 main areas. What's going on there? What's the
Geoengineering.
And geoengineering. Thank you. So what you're doing is, are you trying to educate people as far as what's going on, what they can and cannot do, the loopholes, things like that? Is that what you guys are working on?
No, it's not. It's not educational as such. There is an affidavit that has facts in it, but it's mostly because these are military type agendas that are meant to control and or destroy things. It's a huge issue, but what they've done is they're doing all of these things through commercial means. It's not a country and an army that's doing it. It's actually corporations that are carrying out all or most of these things. So it's not a military maneuver. It's military in scope, but it's commercial in fact. So we can deal with commerce in commerce, and it's all based on contract and tacit agreements. They have to get our agreement in order to implement these things, and that's how they're doing it. And most people can't figure that out, so they're trying to go to their government and say, you're not testing all this, and this is causing harm. But they're just ignoring that because it's not in the correct venue. It's not in the correct jurisdiction. So that's why I try and teach jurisdiction, so you can at least understand that there's something higher, and you got to start thinking in those terms, because they've got you in a box and you think that's all there is, and there's no effect in there because it's happening outside of that jurisdiction.
By tacit agreement, you mean what that means basically is if you don't say no, you're essentially saying yes. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's more like if you don't say no in the correct way, in pure law merchant. So everything is everything is done in honor. There's customs. It's like a way of doing things. So you don't disagree with somebody. You conditionally accept their claim upon proof. So you put a subject in it, and then normally what would happen if somebody was making a false claim, in your agreement you would say, I will agree with your claim upon you proving it, and then you get X amount of days or whatever it is, or hours. And if you can't prove it, then you're going to owe me double. So that's how it would self-correct. So merchants wouldn't take advantage of another merchant because of the way the system worked.
What comes to mind on that are the smart meters. They seem to have not given people a choice when they started implementing all the smart meters. But I understand some people did fight back. But yeah, if you don't say anything, out comes the man, and before you know it, they've installed it. I remember my own apartment when I was living in Spain. This was before I had taken the metaphorical red pill, as you like. They said, oh, we're changing your meter over, and we didn't have a choice. Suddenly we had a smart meter in our apartment. And then I started learning about all of that. It's fascinating, everything that you're working on. Where you've just spoken at Red Pill Expo, what's down the line? What's further down the line then? What plans have you got going on?
Well, we're putting up a platform where people can join, and people of like mind, and learn more, and be around each other and encourage each other. So basically, we want to be able to flock and create our own group, for lack of a better term, and then implement these contracts in order to reverse everything that they're trying to do. At the same time, if they don't reverse, we are creating wealth in their, according to their system, according to the world system. So, because these contracts are valid, and the money that's written on there is actual work. It creates money based on their system. So that's what we're doing.
That's great. Cal, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No. Read the Canada thing, and that will give you sort of the. I have no proof of this, but Canada, it has been, that system has worked because it's fooled a lot of people, and I think that a lot of the other countries has been a copy of this, because they've been able to get away with it for 300 years or plus, 350 years approximately, and that's an amazing thing to have a corporation act as a government and everybody believe something different. It's quite the thing, that because it's right in front of you if you look, but they've been able to get away with it, and I think possibly that has been the model in order to get all the other countries, even if they form properly, into a corporate sort of state, and then implement the law merchant, etc., through that.
It's a brilliant magic trick, brilliantly evil.
Yeah, the Queen's Proclamation, I've seen a lot of documents. That's the best piece of word magic that I've ever seen. It's brilliant, evilly brilliant, but brilliant. And it's right there for you to read. There's a subject right in it, right at, where it says this will come into effect, comma, subject to, and nobody sees it. And it's right there, right? So it's not in effect.
Yeah, I can't find it now. Yeah, something she said as well. Yeah, and all other subjects. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's to my loving these presents are to my loving subjects and all others to whom these presents might pertain, right? So it's just brilliant how well it's drafted, and it's only a few paragraphs long, but it's just absolutely brilliant.
Well, so inpower.com, like INPOWER, inpower.com. Cal Washington, I really appreciate it. Again, mind-blowing as always to talk to you and to listen to you. I appreciate you talking to me today.
Yeah, no problem, Chris.
All right, thanks a lot.
Okay.